Welcome back, everybody, to another episode of Puppet Masters and Castle Freaks, the internet's leading all things Charles Band podcast. I am one of your hosts, Jared Hornbeck, coming to you from Brooklyn, New York, and you can kind of refer to me as the daddy mother of this podcast, if you were so inclined. But I'm not here alone. Of course, I see a squid over there who might be a trancer, but I don't know. But his hair is too dry or too wet. I forget the rules. Anyway, who's over there?
Oh, it's me. It's tragically dry-haired Steve Guntley here in Austin, Texas. And this is the podcast about tapbacks, crystal shark droids, and exploding ham. That's because this is a podcast about Trancers 2, Return of Jack Deth, and Trancers 3, Deth Lives. These are the follow-ups to one of the iconic movies of the Empire Films era. One of the few series that's going to make the jump from Empire over to Full Moon, which we will get into in a moment. But happy to be back in the presence of Deth. And we are joined by a special guest who's going to help talk us through all of this time-jumping chaos. Who's with us today?
So we have a very special guest today joining us for our double dose of death, which I was really looking forward to saying on microphone and not jumbling those words.
Hey,
and I did it. He is an author of a recent book called Death Machine, which everyone should check out. He is a podcaster and host of the amazing Cradle to the Grave podcast that Steve and I have been lucky enough to have been a part of already. I'm talking, of course, Erik Hanson. Erik, what's up, dude? Thank you for joining us. How's it going?
Yeah, it is going good. I am super stoked to talk not only about one Trancer movie, but two Trancer movies. Is this the first for your podcast? Has anybody ever done two movies in one?
We have. Yeah, we're like we've kind of set the precedent of like we'll do a full episode just on the first movie of a franchise. But as you well know, these Full Moon franchises are meaty, so we bundled up some of them. Like we did a Ghoulies 1 and 2 episode. We did a Puppet Master 2 and 3. And we're definitely going to bundle the Evil Bongs. And
I not only watched Trancers 2 and 3, I also watched Trancers 1 just so I could be fully immersed in the Trancer world.
Yes.
And man, I'm so ready to talk Trancers. I've been looking forward to this. Thank you so much for inviting me to come on.
Yeah, of course, Erik. And we had discussed potential movies, and as it tends to go now with a lot of guests, people have thrown movies back to us that are either already accounted for or already episodes. And so you and I got chatting about a little bit about Tim Thomerson, and Trancers 1. And so I was like, oh, well, why don't you come on for the sequel episode? So it was nice to know that we had a guest such as yourself for an episode of this magnitude. And this is a little bit off brand because Erik, you're a horror guy. Cradle to the Grave, your podcast. I love the mission statement of your podcast because every year that I get a little older, I think of doing the same thing, which is basically making some kind of list or dedication to the all of the horror movies from every year that I've been alive. And that's what you do on Cradle to the Grave. And you bring in amazing guests, some guest crossover also with our show. And you talk for half hour, 45 minutes with people about a different movie, and then you cram. I always look forward to your best of episodes dropping because you cram. I see like this 3-hour podcast, and I'm like, I know I'm going to listen to people talk about 5 or 6, different movies in each one, and it's a lot of fun. So this is more, sci-fi action, but obviously they share a lot of DNA with horror stuff. But tell our listeners who might not be too familiar with Cradle to the Grave a little bit about the show, and then where that journey from Cradle to the Grave started for you as pertains to horror and low budget stuff.
Yeah, absolutely. So, like you said, a longtime horror fan. I loved horror as long as I can remember. Right? And I say that in my intro to every episode of Cradle to the Grave. As long as I can remember, I've been a fan of the horror genre. So, growing up, watching Christopher Lee movies on Saturday morning on the Chiller Theater on Channel 40. That was my introduction to the horror genre. Like Christopher Lee will always hold special place in my heart. I'm actually writing my second novel. It's a vampire novel, and it's dedicated to Christopher Lee. So
awesome. Amazing.
Yeah. And so that kind of started me on my journey. And then from there, I start to immerse myself in the horror world. I start reading horror comics and around the time of the 1980s, the VHS started, we got a VHS player, so I can go rent the video cassettes. And so my favorite genre is always, I want to rent, Dawn of the Dead and Friday the 13th. I was really attracted to that,
Sure.
And from there, just off and running. And I've always been a fan of the horror genre. And, so last year I started Cradle to the Grave podcast. I've always been listening to podcasts, and Evolution of Horror is one of my favorite podcasts.
So
Mike Munster's been a guest on my show, and his show really was inspiring. Like, you know what? If Mike can do it, I can do it. Right? And so I'm like, maybe I'll start it. What can I do that's going to be a little different? Try to mix it up. So why don't I just go through every year of my life, started in 1971. So I was born in 71. Yes, I'm old. I know that. But take each year of my life and 10 horror films from that year and have 10 guests come on and chat with me about it. Pretty simple. And it's been a blast. Right now, I am in 1985. Next week, the Best of 85 episode drops. And so it's been a blast actually going through the true evolution of the horror genre, for me at least, from 71 to now, and seeing the progression of the genre. It's been really amazing, actually. Around 74, when Texas Chainsaw hit, that changed everything, right?
Oh yeah.
I mean, yeah, you can say that Night of the Living Dead in 68 really was the birth of the modern horror film. Things really got, amped up. But for my money, it was in 74 when Chainsaw hit, things just changed. And from then on, you see how the horror genre has matured, and the way directors are approaching the subject matters, and it's been amazing. And then now I'm in the 80s. You get a lot of sequels in the 80s, because when Hollywood sees something that's making money, you look at Halloween, Carpenter's Halloween, which was made for what, $50,000 or something.
No, I think it was like 300,000 or something, but it's still like a
Still
pretty
minuscule.
paltry.
Yeah, still minuscule.
And how much has it made?
I mean,
Yeah.
for a long
hundreds
time,
of
I think
millions.
until the Blair Witch Project, it was the most
So
successful
what I'm saying?
independent movie of all time.
Yeah.
So when Hollywood sees that, they're like, well, shit, we need to start making our own horror films, and then sequel after sequel. So I love the decade of the 80s, but yeah, there's a lot of crap in the 80s too. So yeah, I'm right. Like I said, right now in the podcast, I'm in 85, making my way to modern day, which I did some calculations, and I think that I'll reach modern day in 2026. And then after that, I'm not sure what's going to happen in the podcast. I had mentioned once before that I may go backwards from 70 to 1922, which was, Nosferatu came out in 1922. So sure. I may go reverse. So, right. It'll be Grave to the Cradle.
Love it.
We'll see what happens. But
so, Eric,
you're gonna Benjamin Button this, yeah.
Yes, exactly. I was just gonna say that.
Oh, sorry. We keep doing that. I'm sorry.
We're a hive mind here, and we make a lot of the same jokes in our head and references. And
I've noticed
one of us will.
You guys have a very similar sense of humor. I've listened to your podcast, and you guys play off each other well. So,
thanks, man. So 1985 is where you are in Cradle to the Grave. That's an important year because that's the setting of Trancers 1.
Yeah.
And Eric, were you familiar with Full Moon or Empire when the first Trancers came out?
Yeah, so you guys have been on my show. You came on to chat about Friday the 13th Part 4.
We sure did.
Yes.
The final chapter, the final Friday.
Last one ever made.
There were no more. It's a shame. I was hoping that franchise had potential.
How special was that for you guys to come on and chat about the very last Friday the 13th movie? I mean,
four and done, yeah.
So you guys came on and we chatted about that movie, and I'd mentioned that we kind of covered a little bit about your podcast, and I mentioned I knew about the Full Moon movies, right? 'Cause, of course, being a horror fan, you can't escape their presence. You know, they were, you know, when you go into the video store, you see the giant, they had the biggest boxes ever, right? Their boxes took up the entire shelf. So you had no choice but to go, oh, what's this? Puppet Master. But I was a bit of a film snob, and I think we covered that. I mentioned, Steve, I think you even mentioned like you were kind of a film snob at one point in your life, right?
Definitely.
So,
yeah. Still am in large.
Was.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Tiny bit.
So, and I was in the same boat. I ain't got time for these low budget horror films. I want to watch the, you know, the big budget. I wanted, you know, the epic movie. So I kind of passed them over. Occasionally I would dip in, you know, if there was nothing else to rent, if everything else was rented out, fine, fuck, I'll rent Subspecies. Right? So, but I actually like Subspecies. That's actually that was the first movie I wanted to talk to you guys about, but unfortunately it was picked. So I am slightly familiar with the catalog. I wouldn't say I'm well versed in it, but I will say that I'm well versed in Trancers now, thanks to you guys.
Absolutely.
Well, we're just doing our due diligence by filling your life full of Tim Thomerson. So, Steve, we've got two big Trancers movies to talk about today. Why don't you fire off some stats about Trancers 2, The Return of Jack Deth?
Absolutely. Let's do that. So that movie was released August 21st, 1991. It's directed by Charles Band and it's written by Jackson Barr, and it stars Tim Thomerson, Helen Hunt, Megan Ward, Biff Menard, Allison Croft, Martine Beswick, Jeffrey Combs, Barbara Crampton, Sonny Carl Davis, Thelma Hopkins, Art LaFleur, and Richard Lynch. I kept the cast list long here because I wanted people to hear A, how many returning cast members we have here, and B, how many Full Moon favorites are just sprinkled throughout this thing. As we discussed with the first film, Trancers was one of the first films that Charles Band was really, really proud of that he did, you know? And so when Empire finally shut down in the late 80s, he sold off all of their company's IP to MGM except for Trancers. That was the one part of the deal. He said, you guys can have all of this, just let me keep Trancers for my next thing. So he wanted to do a sequel with the first cohort of like Full Moon movies alongside like the Puppet Master and some of the very, very first movies. But some production delays happened. You know, there actually was a poster originally of Trancers 2 coming soon, starring Tim Thomerson, written by Paul DeMeo and Danny Bilson. All right. He had it like on the poster that they were going to come back. Which in true Charles Band fashion was not, you can't really believe everything that was on the poster. He would use his posters kind of like the secret like manifestation boards, you know, like those were his dream boards. He's like, I'm going to put this out in the universe and see if I can make this happen. But, you know, Paul DeMeo and Danny Bilson were on to bigger and better things at this time. They were the creators of the early 90s Flash TV show, which didn't last very long, but it has a cult following. And they were also working with Disney at this time for the film The Rocketeer, which is one of my very favorite Disney movies ever.
That's a cool
I
movie.
love The Rocketeer. So much
released
fun.
at the wrong time. It was a movie that could have been a huge hit if it was released a few years earlier or a few years later. It was just that and Dick Tracy. Those two movies came out at the same time, and they just, for whatever reason, they just couldn't. It's like in our cultural zeitgeist, we were not ready to embrace these kind of serialized properties in that manner. And it's just like, I think about it, and it's like if Dick Tracy had come out in 1988, if it had predated Batman 89 even by 1 year, it would have been a bigger hit. And with Rocketeer also, I think it was just a little too earnest. We were starting to look for like dark superhero stuff at that point.
I think so.
It's sad because it's a really good movie.
Yeah, absolutely. I keep waiting for people to kind of like rediscover that movie. Every year, I'm like, is this the year people are going to rediscover The Rocketeer and how much that movie slaps? And never
Steve,
quite do.
You'll probably appreciate this, Steve, but I can remember being super excited not only to see The Rocketeer, but also to get the copy of Disney Adventures with The Rocketeer on the front.
Yeah. Was he on there with like Darkwing Duck or something? Yeah.
I've tried to get my kids to watch The Rocketeer. So it's on Disney Plus, I believe, right?
Okay.
Rocketeer.
Yeah.
And I'm like, hey, let's watch The Rocketeer. They have zero interest. I don't know. Maybe it's the period setting. You know, this movie's old.
Yeah.
And they're just not it. But it's a great story based on a comic book, I believe, right?
It is. Yeah.
And so it's got great acting, great special effects. Yeah, I don't know. It's just.
I mean, you pull it up on IMDb, and the first 4 cast lists you see is Billy Campbell, Jennifer Connelly, Alan Arkin, and Timothy Dalton.
Give me a break. Come on. It's you can't go wrong there.
I think like a lot of young men my age, I developed an instant and lifelong crush on Alan Arkin.
Oh boy.
So
Me
I
too.
think we all get it. Yeah, Alan Arkin in that movie. Ooh,
Steve, that was good, man. I did not expect the Alan to drop the Alan Arkin.
Yeah. So the Rocketeer was kind of taking up DeMeo and Bilson's time, and as we covered in our arena episode, like I don't think Danny Bilson was super excited to work with band again after the way that whole movie went down, so it seems like he doesn't really hold a grudge or anything, but he's probably willing to kind of strike out on his own at this point. So they were also
willing to show up though in the video zone.
Absolutely.
So there couldn't have been too much of a rift, because they kind of show up on screen in the video zone and go, yeah, this movie's being made. We weren't super involved, but here we are.
Yeah, absolutely. It's clear. Like, Bilson even said in those arena special features, he's just like, look, I like Charlie Band a lot. We're still friends to this day. It's just, I think I've learned it's better for our friendship that we don't be business partners anymore. So unfortunately they were down those screenwriters, but luckily Tim Thomerson was back. Helen Hunt was brought back. Most of the supporting cast, Richard Lynch, Jeffrey Combs, Barbara Crampton, all have little appearances in here, and they're kind of full moon staples at this point. But unfortunately, the new script was by newcomer Jackson Barr, who would later contribute to the Subspecies script. And it was definitely a less sprightly and fun kind of movie. I think the DeMeo and Bilson scripts, I think that we've come to really appreciate between that and Arena, like, they show that these are guys who really have a love of film history. They have a real love of genre, and they kind of infuse Trancers with a lot of that. They infuse Arena with a lot of that. And we're definitely missing some of that reverence, some of that self-referential kind of humor in Trancers too, I think. I think the problem with this movie is that it's trying to recreate kind of what worked with the first movie, without really striking out in any terribly original directions, and it's missing just a lot of that energy and a lot of that humor,
Yeah. So for listeners who aren't aware, just the most basic summary of the movie is that it takes place 6 years after Jack Deth returns home. He's battling future alien zombies. His life is turned upside down with 2 wives, and there's a mad scientist who's trying to create more of these Trancers. And I think my problem with this movie, which I think is definitely a considerable step down in quality from the original movie, is that the original movie, like Steve said, is concerned with like a time and a place and a feeling, and a lot of it is rooted in existing film. There's a lot of references to things, and there's a feel to it. This movie is way more concerned with convoluted plot beats than it is with trying to establish a mood. And I feel like that's what's missing, because from minute 1 of the original Trancers, you get, okay, this is like futuristic, but also feels like it's in the past. There's a lot of neons and a lot of like big angular things, and it's a lot of references to film noir, and that movie is very hard boiled. And this movie brings back a lot of the characters, but it doesn't bring back like a lot of the feeling of the first movie. And Helen Hunt, even like her character in the first movie, is kind of like a punk rock girl that's gone in this movie. Now she's just a totally normal woman of the 90s.
She continues to be a pro. Like, I think her performance is good and she's doing everything she can with it, but I do miss that kind of like youthful, sort of vibrant energy she brought to the character the first time around. Like, that feels like it's been a little tamped down because the screenwriter doesn't really know how to write women very well.
Was this your guys' first time watching Trancers 2, or have you seen this in the past?
This is my first time with 2 and 3. Yeah, I'm kind of discovering the Trancers series in real time for this show.
Yeah, I'm in the same boat. I watched it. I've seen Trancers, the first movie, a number of times, and the sequels were, I should say, like a big blind spot to me going into this one. So this was a first for 2 and 3 were both first time watches for me, despite being pretty well versed in the original.
Yeah, I was trying to rack my brain. I feel like I saw the first Trancers back in the 80s.
Okay.
It's this because like I said, I watched all three.
Yeah.
And revisiting it or watching it this week, I was like, man, I think I've watched it. And I like the first Trancers. It's like this mix of Blade Runner, the Terminator, even some Avatar thrown in there, because people are going back and their essence or their soul is like inhabiting somebody else, was kind of like Avatar. I was also reminded of, you guys ever read a comic book called The Long Tomorrow by Morbius? It was adapted. You ever see the animated film Heavy Metal?
Yeah.
Okay, that first story is an adaptation of The Long Tomorrow, and it has like the hard-boiled detective, in the futuristic, but there's also like this old kind of like diner type settings. And so when Trancers 1 starts out, I'm like, oh shit, this is like the Heavy Metal, this is like Morbius, and I was digging it. And then they go back in time, modern day or whatever. Like it gets a little convoluted. But for me, Trancers is all about Tim Thomerson, man. Like this guy, I love him so much. And I printed out his Wikipedia page. I don't know if you guys have seen his Wikipedia page. It's like, look at all this shit that this guy has done. He's done.
He kind of shows up for everything,
and so much.
He seems to be one of those guys that no one has a bad word to say about.
Seriously,
like everybody just really loves working with him. He was a former stand-up comedian, but he just happens to look like a granite statue character actor. Like it just kind of works out that he's this sort of big, imposing guy with kind of this goofy sensibility, and he just kind of works for these movies, and I think that's so far the most consistent thing in all these Trancers movies is that he is so fun, and he's digging it. He's having a great time.
Yeah, he really is, and I've become a big fan of his. I mean, I was like I said, I'd seen the first Trancers, and I really, before we started doing the show, if you would have said Tim Thomerson to me, my brain would have went to Doll Man first,
probably,
because that's where I would think of him, as Brick Bardo and Doll Man first. But as I watch him over these different characters and just the infectious like joy that he brings to these sets, and the effort he's giving every time, like I'm just really becoming such a big fan of him and his presence and things, where like he's in Near Dark, but he's not integral part of Near Dark. Where like he doesn't have the opportunity to shine like he does in these movies. And for whatever we might say that's negative about Trancers 2, and I do think that there are certainly aspects of the movie to nitpick, like he is not a problem. You cannot nitpick his performance and his energy. And really, I feel like you can kind of say that about the cast. Like the thing about this movie is it feels like they wanted to retread the first movie, like you sort of mentioned before, Steve, without understanding fully what worked about it. But I don't blame anyone involved in like the cast or crew so much. Like I think everybody is doing a good job. The girl, I enjoy the really silly performance of Art LaFleur as a teenager.
And again, it's like
in the first movie we get her as like a kid, as a 9-year-old or however old she is. But this time and Alison Croft is the name of the actress playing the teenage McNulty. But just her cutting to this girl as McNulty with like cigar chomping while she's talking was just I got a real kick out of that. And I enjoyed that. And I think
that remains funny, but that is
ahead.
kind of just like an evolution of the same joke from the first movie. It's just like,
Right.
oh, okay, you still got to come back, and it's the same girl, but now she's 6 years older. It's kind of the same joke.
Yeah. We get a little more Biff Maynard in this one as Hap Ashby, and during the drunken baseball scene with the with the homeless population, I saw in the Video Zone that a lot of those homeless characters were like Albert Band and Helen Hunt's father and Tim Thomerson or Charles Band's mother-in-law and sister-in-law or someone in there. And so I think that was kind of fun that they brought those people in. And I wanted to come in originally with a reference to the drunken baseball game that takes place, because it's a little bit out of place, like that weird 10-minute long softball game in Sleepaway Camp.
I was gonna say, it reminded me of that. Yeah. Like, why does it, what's happening right now?
Yeah, this is also kind of an interesting origin story for a character that's going to be pretty major in another Full Moon franchise later on. This is the introduction of Sonny Carl Davis as the character of Rabbit, who is an orderly at the mental hospital in this movie. And it's clear that like Band is sort of enamored with this guy's energy already, because there's no reason this character should take up as much runtime as he does. He's kind of in this movie a lot. And then very weirdly, he is going to be brought back like 20 something years later as the lead of the Evil Bong franchise. Like, I think he takes over the Evil Bong movies starting with like number 5 or 6, somewhere in there. Like, that's just a weird arc for this like very minor character to go. And I was just a little confused by who this guy is and like what his appeal is for Charles Band.
I felt like Jeffrey Combs was really underused in Trancers 2. When he showed up, like, oh, great. He's got a goatee. He looks like the evil twin of Jeffrey Combs, like, oh, right on.
Yeah.
But he's like, he's kind of wasted. And,
and Barbara Crampton is like, blink and you'll miss her. Like, I had to go back and find her. But my theory is that just based on Jeffrey Combs' look in this movie, that he was in the middle of filming Dr. Mordred and came in like on his lunch breaks or whatever to shoot a little cameo as a favor. Like, that's my theory, because he's absolutely rocking the Doctor Strange-esque like a little goatee.
No, you're absolutely right, Stephen. There's actually a segment in the video zone of Trancers 3 where it cuts to just a actor spotlight on Barbara Crampton, and she doesn't even mention anything about a Trancers movie. The whole interview with her, which is like 2 to 3 minutes long, is her talking about Robot Wars, which they were filming at the time. So I definitely think that this was just a favor. Like, I think for them, it was like, we'll pop into your movie for a couple scenes, because, we get the sense that there is a stable of people who've enjoyed working for Charles Band and who seem to show up when he needs a face in there. And I don't know which was shot first, this or Puppet Master 3, because they came out in the same year, and there's coming attractions for Puppet Master 3 in the video zone for this as well. But I do think, Band was successful because he got that Richard Lynch money.
Yeah. And he can afford the wax sculpture man himself. Yes.
I love Richard Lynch so much.
Oh,
he's just such an amazing face and presence.
You guys, I'm sure you've seen The Sword and the Sorcerer.
The very first Albert Pune movie.
When Richard Lynch showed up, like, oh, cool. It was his name in the movie Cromwell, I think. I can't remember.
That sounds right to me.
Yeah. So I always love it when Richard Lynch shows up. And I had forgotten, or probably because I hadn't really seen these movies ever, is Helen Hunt. I love Helen Hunt. She is great in these films. She kind of dropped out like 3. She barely is in it, but one of my favorite films ever is Twister.
Yeah.
I love Twister so much. It's one of me and my kids' favorite films to watch. I think I've watched Twister maybe over 50 times. So I'm
probably up there with that one too. I love that. That was
I hear there's a sequel.
Is
Twister 2 happening? Have you heard anything about a sequel to Twister?
That's something they've been like tossing around since I think the original was a hit, and that's going on 30 years now. Bill Paxton's gone, and Helen Hunt is still around, but she definitely has like slowed down her film output. But yeah, it is great to see her here. She's
great, but you're right. She dropped the whole punk thing from Trancers 1, and now she's wearing mom pants in Trancers 2. Like, what happened?
Yeah, 6 years, like they're married now, they're settling down, and we should talk about the kind of the most interesting, but also a little baffling elements of this movie is the introduction of Jack Deth's other wife. She's played by actress Megan Ward, who people our age will remember. She was kind of like an early 90s, like girl next door heartthrob type in a lot of movies. You'll know her from PCU and Encino Man and Joe's Apartment, things like that. She was always kind of popping up, never really like made the leap to like a big name actress, but she was always a welcome presence. And I think she's very good here. This is where it gets kind of convoluted because Jack Deth's wife died several years like in the future, before the events of the first movie. And so apparently they were able to get around this by just going back in the timeline to the day before she was supposed to die and then sending that version of her back to her. For people who don't remember the plot of the first one, you can only time travel back into the body of an ancestor, so it just happens to work out that like Jack Deth's ancestor looks exactly like Tim Thomerson, and it's, not a problem. But like so you need to jump back into an ancestor. His wife jumps back into her ancestor, who unfortunately is in a mental hospital. And so there's this whole plot of trying to get her out of there as well. But things get a little complicated because Jack Deth is being a dog in this movie. Like he is being kind of unrepentantly bigamistic about this movie. Like,
you son of a bitch.
Poor Helen Hunt walks in on
two
him,
times,
like, multiple times. Yes, like, and he always tries to like shake it off.
Son of a bitch.
But he's being a little bit of a slut in this movie, which it is what it is. But it is cool that Helen Hunt came back for this. Like she, I think it was kind of already clear that her career was about to take off. She would have been shooting Mad About You around this
was she
time.
doing that at that time with Trancers 2? Was she in
and
that
yeah
sitcom?
I think
she was shooting that sitcom.
Mhm.
And I think that was kind of the logic of introducing Megan Ward's character, because I think they kind of figure it's like, all right, well, we love Helen, but she's about to become a big star. Like I don't think we can hold on to her. To the point, like we'll talk about, but to the point where like they didn't even ask her to come back for Trancers 3 just because they assumed she wouldn't be able to do it. Mad About You was on the air at that point. It was a big hit. And they're like, oh, yeah, well, obviously she's not going to be able to do it. And then she heard through like a friend of a friend that they were doing that. And she's like, come on, put me in this. I can't be in much, but I would love to come back and like give some closure to this character.
Which is a pretty great story that you don't really hear too often. It's like it says a lot about her. It says a lot about Charles Band. It says a lot about Tim Thomerson. And that's kind of what I gathered watching the special features and behind the scenes of this movie. I'm not particularly in love with this movie as a sequel to Trancers, which is a movie that I really like a lot. But this is one of those movies that strikes me as being more fun to make than it was to watch, because everyone's having a blast. Like when you watch this behind the scenes, like they're laughing, they're talking about how they're a family. They were so happy to come back together. Everyone has nothing negative to say about the experience, about one another. And there's just an infectiousness to all of them together that, unfortunately, I feel like the film is so bogged down by these plot contrivances that it's like the people don't have time to breathe in these characters. And it's like, it's sort of a jumble of all of these like parts, and the parts on their own are good. Like Helen Hunt is really good. Tim Thomerson is really good. The supporting cast is good. Some of the effects aren't too bad, but when you put it together, it just doesn't quite gel the way that the first movie does, which is unfortunate because it looked like it was a blast to make.
Absolutely.
One of my favorite scenes in Trancers 2 is the slow motion forklift gunfight that they have.
Yeah.
It kind of feels like they were doing the slow motion themselves, like the actors, like they didn't like slow the camera film down. That just move real slow, Tim.
That is absolutely what they're doing.
I can't be held to this, but I think there's a prop that falls out of a person's hand, and instead of the hand is moving in slow motion, but the prop falls at regular speed.
Yes.
So good, man. And
so
when we say that that these movies are great, I think there needs to be like a caveat that these are great B movies, right?
Sure.
They are not the masterpieces, like the Terminator, like Cameron's Terminator or Ridley Scott's Blade Runner. That's not what these movies are, right?
No.
They're good. They're good, great B movies that are fun, cheesy dialogue. The thing that makes Trancers fun to watch for me is cheesy dialogue spoken with sincerity.
Absolutely.
Like these guys believe, Tim Thomerson believes what he's saying, right? It's not done. I mean, there might be a little bit of a wink, like sometimes he'll turn to the camera or he'll say some really cool line like they're biodegradable, there's some fun aspects, but mostly he's playing it straight, and that's what makes it cool, right? And everybody's playing it straight, and we're all in on the joke together, and it kind of brings everybody together in this Trancers family.
You're absolutely right, Eric. And this is one of the things, like we've mentioned this many times on microphone, that as a show, like our approach to these movies comes from a place of respect and a place of adoration. I mean, we give our sincere opinions, so we're not going to love every aspect of every movie, and we're not going to hide behind that. But at the same time, we approach all of these things with love, and we appreciate, you know, these movies that have been made, and we look at them and we analyze them as B movies. But it's like you said, there's a lot of things that happen in Trancers 1 and even in this one to a lesser extent. And when we get into Trancers 3, I think maybe a step in the right direction, that where it doesn't just kind of fall completely into camp. It's like it's played in a way, it's played straight, and it's like there's campy elements, but it doesn't come into it doesn't turn into self-parody or anything like that. And I think that, to me, that's when Full Moon is at its best, is when you can have fun with these premises and these effects, and like you said, everyone is in on the joke together. And so, like, this isn't that classic era Full Moon. I personally don't consider this a classic in the sense that we use as a measurement, but I think, you know, there is a sincerity to all of this stuff, and we've harped on it a bit about Tim Thomerson's performance, and he's just in. He's 100% in, and so that's gonna make me run this thing out through its runtime. I will say that because the plot is a little bit more convoluted than the first movie, we do get an unnecessarily longer runtime of this one, an hour 28. This could have been 75 minutes, like the first,
for sure.
like the first and third movie.
Absolutely. Yeah, no, I agree. I think the spirit is there, but this does ultimately kind of feel like a pale imitation of the original. It doesn't feel like it's quite as fun, and it's too bogged down with jargon and exposition. And I think that's something that they directly address with Trancers 3. If we're ready to get into that, I would love to
Fire
talk
them
about
off.
Trancers 3, Deth lives, sometimes stylized with an exclamation point. In my head, it's always going to be there.
It should always be stylized.
Deth lives.
This
one was released October 14th, 1992. It's directed and written by C. Courtney Joyner, and it stars Tim Thomerson, Helen Hunt, Melanie Smith, Andrew Robinson, Thelma Hopkins, Stephen Mock, R.A. Mihalov, and Megan Ward. So this is the first and I would argue superior directorial effort from C. Courtney Joyner, who wrote Puppet Master 3 and directed Lurking Fear, which we talked about already. Charlie Band clearly believed in Joyner's script here because he gave him a $2 million budget, which was way up from the $400,000 they spent on Trancers 2. And you can see it like immediately. This looks like so much more of a quote unquote real movie than Trancers 2 did.
Oh, Steve, you know, this might be a good time to talk about this. It was brought to my attention by someone who is a fan of the show and friend of the show, who has a lot of background knowledge of Full Moon. A guy named Charles Zimmerman, a friend of the show, definitely giving us lots of feedback. He brought to my attention some interesting stuff that I never really thought about as it pertained to Trancers 2, which was these movies. I don't know if you guys noticed this, but in Trancers 2, and I wrote this in my notes, and I meant to bring it up earlier, but doesn't it seem to you like there are an awful lot of close-ups?
Yeah,
of people looking directly in the camera. Well, when those movies, like when some of the movies were shot, and Trancers 2 being one of them, because Charles Band knew that this was not going to be a theatrical release the way that they had that, you know, limited and unsuccessful theatrical release of the first movie. This was shot in like a 4:3 aspect ratio.
Oh, okay.
And so when they were remastered, they were kind of just blown up a little bit because it originally was like to, you know, formatted to fit television screens. So when you watch it in like a remastered version now, it's clearer, but it's also blown up to fit the aspect ratio of how we watch things now. It wasn't designed to be in widescreen. And you can really see it in Trancers 2. Like there's moments where it's the face takes up the entire frame.
Definitely.
So close.
Yeah, we get right up in there.
Yeah, and that was a big thing. Like you see it a little bit in Trancers 3 too, but not nearly as much. And I think, like you said, Steve, from second one of Trancers 3, there is just a noticeable rise in quality. It is slick compared to Trancers 2. I mean, it just the production design, it looks, and that's what I appreciate, is that it had 5 times the budget. And to me, when you look at the production design, right from the opening scene of the movie, you can see 5 times the budget being put to work here. And I appreciate that about it.
But
so,
go ahead.
I'll just say, here's my problem with Trancers 3. Okay. Let me tell you my problem with Trancers.
Okay.
I'm rolling up my sleeves in anticipation.
All right, we're ready for this.
Okay. So I feel like Trancers 1 and Trancers 2 were filmed in somebody's backyard, right? I like that. To me is what makes a Trancers movie. All of a sudden in Trancers 3, where did all this production value come from, right? I feel like Trancers 3, is it a better shot film? Yeah. Does it have better effects? Yes. Is it, acting better? Sure. But that to me is the antithesis of what makes a good Trancers film, right? I feel like, is it a better movie overall? Sure. But it's not, to me, it just didn't feel like a Trancers movie.
Interesting.
Like
so we've got some intrigue. We've got some differing opinions here.
It felt like somebody trying to make a Trancers movie with more money. No,
it's a fair
that's not
point.
what Trancers is. Trancers is about making a movie with no money. Do you guys feel me?
Yeah, no, absolutely. I get that. It's a fair point.
And it was rated R. Like, all of a sudden, Trancers has boobs. It's got the F-bombs. It's like, wait a second. I don't want this in my Trancers movie.
Oh, see, I want all of those things in my Trancers movie. I want all of those things in all of my movies, to be honest.
I mean, hey,
I'm
cool with boobs. I'm cool with boobs and the F word. But to me, Trancers it's like reading a comic book. So here's an example. I collect comic books, mostly DC. So I read Batman all the time. There was a recent issue where Batman, I think he says the F word. I think he says fuck or something, but they blur it out, right? They have like the squiggly lines or something. Yeah. Batman doesn't say fuck. I'm sorry. He doesn't. But we got to make him edgy and gritty and stuff. Like that doesn't belong in a Batman comic book. To me, in a Trancers movie, tits don't belong in Trancers, right? The F word doesn't belong in Trancers. So that's where I'm coming from.
Well, there's a playful earnestness, I think, in the first 2 movies. It's a little bit darker, and I don't want to, maybe mean-spirited is not the exact correct description, but it's definitely a little bit more gritty and R-rated for sure. I agree with you, and I agree about the first movie that it does feel like, yes, there are a lot of tricks to make this thing feel like a larger budget than it is. And it does feel sometimes like it is maybe, like you said, shot in somebody's backyard. But I think there's little design touches in the first movie where they're going for something to set it apart and to create, to world build in some way in the first movie, no matter how cheap it might be, that you don't really have in the second movie. So I appreciate that more energy is put into set design in the third movie. I 100% understand the point that you're making, but I feel like in watching them in succession, especially, I felt like the slickness and the grander scale of 3 was welcome to me at that time.
Yeah,
I respect that.
I'm right there too. I think, because the first 2 movies are so similar, like it's clear, like this series couldn't really be sustained if they were kind of just sticking with the same old. Now, it does mean they had to throw away a lot of continuity. They had to throw away a lot of like some of the lore that they've established. Like the idea of jumping back in time into your ancestor's body is gone completely. Like we don't worry about that anymore.
They're adhering to the late Philip J. Fry rules.
Yes,
in this movie, which I
absolutely
appreciate, which is a fantastic episode of Futurama.
Oh yeah, one of my very favorites. Yeah, no, and I really appreciate kind of the direction that they're taking this. It's like, all right, here's the idea. Like he's a future cop who's kind of a fish out of water, but in Trancers 1 and 2, he never really felt like a fish out of water. Like he had a little bit of confusion about how things were done in 1985, but like that's pretty much completely gone by 1991. And so like we're losing the whole point that he is a future cop entirely. And I think you really need to lean into that element. And so they really up the sci-fi in this one. I mean, starting right from the opening scene where we meet a shark man with a crystal in his forehead.
Where did that guy come from?
Exactly. Like
I love the design though.
Like alien creatures like that weren't really.
Wasn't this a KNB?
It was.
This is a KNB joint. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Awesome.
Yeah, great character designs. You know, this guy's name is Shark, and
no, there are things about Trancers 3 that I do like. I mean, I'm not here to like say Trancers 3 sucked. It was different, and it threw me off, and because I like the original Trancers and Trancers 2. But you got really cool actors like Andrew Robinson, right? He's a great villain. I love his villain.
Man,
really.
What is his name? Colonel Daddy Mother? Is that
Colonel Daddy Mother? Yeah. I mean, do you think that Andrew Robinson has to like floss pieces of the scenery out of his teeth after every movie?
Did you guys catch the nod to Hellraiser in this film?
No.
Okay, when he says to, I forget the actress name, he's like, "Come to Daddy." He says that line. That is from Hell.
You're right. You are right.
So I was like, oh, cool. I like that. And you're right, man. Cool effects. KNB doing some good stuff with the shark character. Jack Deth for me. For one thing, his hair is all wrong in this film. I don't like.
He's got a buzz.
Maybe that's shallow of me. Yeah. He looks way cooler in Trancers 2. I'm sorry, guys. He does.
Well, and I mean, I would argue his Trancers 2 look is wrong too, because they make a big deal in the first movie about how he needs his hair to be slicked back. He needs to be long and slicked back. In this movie, it's kind of like buzz cut almost.
He just looks like not long enough to 10 years. Back. He looks like he aged 10 years between Trancers 2 and 3, which were made back to back, right? 91, 92. Is that right?
Yeah, they were
very close in production. Yeah.
Well, I don't know what Tim Thomerson was doing, but he was living a hard life. he looks a little older in Trancers 3. But even that said, he still makes the movie, right? He's still fun to watch.
Yeah. Look, his energy is really what sells it. Like we mentioned, this is a darker, more violent version of the Trancers universe, but I would argue it's also the funniest one so far, like the most intentionally funny. The fact that we open with that really chintzy commercial of Jack Deth's like detective agency with
them holding
looks like
the
something
cue
the
cards.
Always Sunny crew would make, the cue cards are blocking the screen. Like that's all funny. Like just the dissonance of this like hulking shark man with a crystal forehead walking out of a time pod in the middle of a convenience store. That's funny. Like, and I think this movie is consciously trying to sever some of the ties to the earlier series. So like, we get a couple of returning characters, but they're mostly in cameos. We're all about kind of setting up the new continuity and establishing the new world order of Jack Deth as a time traveling peace officer. Like that's what the series, I don't know if they followed that thread in 4 or 5 and 6, but that's kind of what they're establishing now, is that this is what this guy is now. He's going to hop around in time and solve crimes, which great. That's a fun way to take this show, especially if Helen Hunt is no longer really an element. Like there's nothing really keeping him in 1990s anymore, so why not have him just jump around and be crazy like that? We get a little bit of lore about like who the Trancers are too. And again, it's sort of, overriding or ignoring the stuff that's been established at this point, because the Trancers are basically like psychic zombies or something. Like in the first, it's always been a little squishy in my head about what exactly they are, and this movie confirms that they are the result of a government experiment in 2005, the far distant future of 2005.
Yes.
And the weird decision that this movie makes, and the one that I think I bump up against the most, is just the decision to spend so much time with the Trancers. Like this is Jack Deth is actually limited in this movie. Like
that's my number one knock of Trancers 3, because there's so much of it I like more than Trancers 2, but not quite to the level of Trancers 1. But the one thing to me that I think there was more just Jack Deth, because I Thomerson's performance, as always, super fun, super engaging. There just should have been more of him. We spend a lot of time like in the bar early on with the with the guy from Test Tube Teens from the year 2000. I know you recognize him as that guy. I'm sure you did, Steve.
Oh, the sexiest man who ever lived.
Yeah. When watching this movie, when they go to that bar scene with the Marines or whatever, the army guys,
Trancer Corps, I guess.
It felt like I was watching a different movie. Like, wait, I got it. Did Tubi switch over to another film?
Right. Yeah. Something like that.
But you're right, Jerry. Like, too much time spent for me with these Trancer guys, and they're really aggressive, and it just, I don't know, man. Give me more Jack Deth. Absolutely.
It was going for more. It felt like kind of a Aliens vibe, or like,
it was interesting that they were trying to weaponize the Trancers. So that was kind of a cool plot. All right, I can get down with that.
And you have the one character who's like, she's in the program, but she doesn't want to be. Like, they're getting doped up in these drugs, and then like when they become Trancers, they become kind of out of control, and it's about figuring out. I'm curious who keeps giving government grants to a guy who starts calling himself Colonel Daddy Mother. Like, I don't know. I think for me, if I'm a 4-star general, I'm like, you know what? I don't know if I trust this guy. I think this might be getting to his head. He's dressing like M. Bison and standing in front of large maps. Like, I don't know what's going on.
So when
not going to end well.
No,
we guested on another show, Neon Brainiacs, and we talked about the movie Creepazoids. And that movie has this thing where they got a bunch of like post-apocalyptic former soldiers kind of together. And the way David Dakota shot that movie, a lot of the action and choreography is very kind of jarring. A lot of like 3 shots of stuff happening from far away and stuff. But what's not happening from far away in this movie? Dawn Ann Billings and her face kicks.
Yes,
she is doing those kicks. This is not, there's no stunt person. She trained really hard with the stunt coordinator to be able to choreograph the fight scenes, and those like kicks to the face are legit kicks to the face that she's throwing. And she appears to be in like really great physical shape in the special features and stuff.
She gets jacked in this movie. She's like, so there's some good stuff in like this Trancer Corps subplot. Like, there's some stuff that I like, and I think there's some I like this idea that we are kind of doing like a boot camp movie with monsters. Like the idea is that they're not just super soldiers, they are kind of monsters, and that I like the idea that we're following them. But it just takes up a little bit too much real estate in this movie that's already like 74 minutes long. It's nice and lean, and it really moves. I think that's definitely
they cut down the runtime from Trancers 2. Like, Trancers 3 is what, 117 minutes or something like that. Like, pretty
17 minutes.
It's really down, which is great. But and I just think it's much more sprightly and much more fun. But you do miss more of Jack Deth and more of like I think for me, the thing that really made that first movie pop and really made it feel kind of like a cut above the average B movie was the chemistry and the relationship between him, Thomerson, and Helen Hunt. Like, I thought that really kind of made it feel a little special, and we're missing a lot of those dynamics. Like, he doesn't have quite the same chemistry with any of the other actors.
For sure. And that was another knock against Trancers 3. I know I'm shitting all over Trancers 3, but it starts off.
You're doing it in a polite way, and you're backing up your position. It's totally fine.
Jack Deth and Lena got a divorce. What? So that kind of broke my heart,
Well, he was making out with his other wife quite a lot that last movie.
I know, you son of a bitch. And I get it because Helen Hunt, like you said, she was a big star. Couldn't afford to get her, but Helen Hunt was gracious enough to come back to do probably a day shoot, and so they had to rewrite the movie till they got a divorce. So I get the reasons why, but still, you start off Trancers 3 with this downer, right? And it just, I don't know if it ever picked up for me. Like you said, there wasn't a lot of chemistry there with any other characters, and there's a lot of deaths. There's a lot of gun squibs, blowing up people's chests, and so it's a different movie, but
there was some good chemistry between Andrew Robinson and Melanie Smith, because these are 2 Deep Space Nine veterans.
Oh yeah, that's right. Yeah.
Yeah, they both spent like a decent amount of time on that show. And I want to say I did in the scene where he's trying to kind of convince her to trance and they do the pulsating vein effect
Yeah.
in her face was pretty cool. I thought like, obviously not the most sophisticated of a special effect, but I thought pretty
No, but
effective.
it works. And I think that, again, that's why it's great to have C. Courtney Joyner here, like behind the camera, because he is definitely like DeMeo and Bilson. He's definitely like a genre loving guy who really understands the mechanics of like these worlds and really knows how to kind of pay tribute to these and incorporate a lot of these genre actors who I think are having a lot of fun.
So I talked about two actors who spend time on a television show, and I want to just think about a little thought exercise if anything ever comes of this. But as of a couple of months ago, there were rumors that a major streaming service has a Trancers series in the works.
Really?
And I love the idea because to me, if you get an engaging lead, now obviously I'm not expecting, like 77-year-old Tim Thomerson to come on as the lead as Jack Deth in a current series. But if you can find the right person who's engaging enough, who can really take that role and run with it, if it is Jack Deth as the title role, I think you can have so much fun here. You can have just fish out of water stories showing up in a new town, like I was gonna say like Walker Texas Ranger style, but hopefully better than Walker.
Yeah,
Texas
kind of like
Ranger.
Texas Ranger meets Doctor Who. Like he's because this is setting up the idea that he's no longer constrained by going back down the line or anything. He just has this little time booth and he can jump around to wherever he needs. And I am really hoping we're following up on that with the next movies. Knowing nothing about those films, I hope that that's the thread that they pick up. But that would make it an ideal like TV show. Just like
I'd watch the shit out of a Trancers Netflix series.
Totally.
Yeah, sign me up. I'm there.
Exactly. We said the same thing when we watched Oblivion.
Yeah.
How it was just like it had this, Briscoe County feeling to it, where it was just every week there was a new person wandered into the town of Oblivion, and all of these characters who inhabit the town, give this guy, some difficulty, and there's some scrapes and some adventures, and it sounded so fun and so promising. It really lent itself to that, and I think with Trancers as a series, and it's a series that has, it's gone, outside of just film also. Like Eric, you said you're a collector of comic books. I'm not quite a collector of comic books, but I do have the Full Moon Trancers, an issue of that in my hand right now, which I think the one I'm holding is sort of a collection of maybe 5 or 6 issues in one book. But it's Jack Deth. Jack Deth is back and he's out for blood. And that's what it says on the back with the cool picture from the poster from the first movie. And I was actually thinking about looking into seeing if other collections of other issues exist, because I wouldn't mind getting those. I grabbed a couple of the Puppet Master comics as well, and they're pretty fun. But I think that's what made the first movie so effective. It's what hindered the second movie, I think, and I think it's what makes the third movie feel a little bit more in cartoony spirit, aligned with the first movie, in my own opinion, is that it is kind of like a live action comic book. And that's what we love about it.
For sure. Absolutely. I was thinking that the whole time. I was like, man, this is just like reading a comic book series. Like, I can't wait to get to the next issue to see what happens. I haven't watched Trancers 4, 5, or 6. I actually heard Thomerson doesn't show up in 6, right?
No, I think he's only in until 5. Yeah.
Yeah.
So,
yeah.
I'm not going to watch 6. And I'm not going to bother with it. But I hear that Jack Deth shows up in a movie called Evil Bong. What is Evil Bong? What is that?
How much time do you have, Eric?
He's one of the many Full Moon characters who pops in the Bongiverse, the secret alternate dimension that created by the Evil Bong. So he comes through there. Phil Fondacaro from Decadent Evil, Ginger Dead Man is in there, I believe. Yeah. So, what are you going to do?
He does make a little cameo. Also, for some reason, Bill Moseley hanging around in there in that first Evil Bong too. But we do get it, and it's fun to see him pop up in other things too, because we've covered Dollman on the show. We have not covered Dollman versus Demonic Toys yet on the show, but that's obviously more Tim Thomerson there. And the Brick Bardo character plays into a little kind of stinger scene, amendum to a movie Bad Channels, which we did an episode on a few weeks ago. And so, last week, I think. And so it's just nice to see.
Confused.
Yeah,
we need to go back down the line to figure out exactly when we did that.
Where's Thelma Hopkins when you need her?
Cat back.
And I don't even mean that in terms of time travel. I just mean in general. Where is she?
Yeah,
I need more Thelma Hopkins in my life.
Absolutely.
I professed in the first episode that we did on Trancers how I had a weird crush on Aunt Rachel from Family Matters when I was a kid. So I really love Thelma Hopkins.
Yeah.
Well,
Great. Do we have anything? Any final thoughts on Trancers 2 or 3?
My final thoughts is I'm glad you guys made me watch these movies.
Well, good.
I'm glad you guys forced me at gunpoint to watch. No, I'm kidding. I was pleasantly surprised. I'm
really looking forward to the time when a guest comes up and says, when we ask for final thoughts, and they say, I really hate you now for making us watch these movies. So this is a nice.
We have given a couple guests reason to. Apologies again to Ricky for Witch House.
I'm sure that there are some full moon movies out there that are excruciating to get through. Which you know what, I tip my hat to you guys. You guys are making your way through the catalog, so right on, man. Somebody's got to do it, right?
Definitely, yeah, it's a mandate.
But I really dug the Trancers universe.
I'm glad to hear it.
Pleasantly surprised. The casts, like, wow, Andrew Robinson's showing up, Richard Lynch, what? Jeffrey Combs, what? Like it just kept getting better and better. I wasn't expecting it. I wasn't expecting to like as much as I did.
Yeah.
Well, I'm really happy to hear that.
Yeah, man. I may visit Trancers 4 and 5 just to kind of continue to see where this story goes.
For sure.
And I'm not going to watch 6 because there's no Tim Thomerson. So screw 6.
No point. Well, it's been a delight talking with you about these. It's always been always fun to go over these. Where can people find your amazing podcast?
Oh man, we can just go to Google, type in Cradle to the Grave podcast, and then all the links there. It's on Spotify, it's on Google Podcast. I'm on Instagram, Cradle to the Grave Pod, and the word 2 is the number 2 because somebody had already taken the regular 2. So I'm out there. Send me some some likes on Instagram and friend me on Instagram. Follow the show. I try to put out an episode every week. Sometimes it's every other week. But I'm having you guys are coming back soon. I sent Jared.
Absolutely.
I sent you a list. I know you're going over that list right now from 1988.
We're checking it twice.
So you better jump on it quick, man. Like I said, these films they're going quick, man. People are picking them. So hopefully the one you guys pick is available. But I'm looking forward to having you guys come back.
Oh, we're looking forward to it.
Looking
forward to being there.
Yeah. So cool, man.
Absolutely. Well, listeners, if you like what we do, jump onto Apple Podcasts or Spotify or wherever you're listening. Drop us a 5-star rating and maybe a short review as well if you feel so inclined to do so. If you want to follow the show on Instagram, it is at puppetmasters_Castle Freaks. You can follow my personal account at _Giallo_Jerry and Steve's account at Minotaur Matador. We're also on X and Threads and Blue Sky and YouTube, and there's a lot of other places that you can find the show. And we look forward to just, continuing to put out this content for you guys. This is not the only content, though, that Steve is working hard to put out. So, Steve, what else have you got going on if people want to listen to your sultry voice after this show?
Oh, absolutely. Well, you can find me on my other podcast, Cinema Arcade. That's Cinema Arcade, both words put together. That's a podcast about movies and video games. We are watching a movie every week and then playing the video game adaptation of it to see how it complements, contradicts, or otherwise just weirds people out. So we're getting into January right now. I actually don't totally know what episode we would be on right now. We got some weird ones coming up in January. Like, did people know there was a Napoleon Dynamite video game? I bet you didn't, but we're gonna play it. It's buried on the PSP, so nobody played it.
You just build someone a cake.
Yeah, there's a mini game where you fling the mashed potatoes at a llama. So we will be talking about that pretty soon, and you'll want to definitely tune in with our show next week, because we are going to be talking about a movie that we've actually mentioned quite a bit, because it's weirdly sort of the keystone of the Full Moon Empire universe. Pretty much every director, actor, anybody who's important in Full Moon came through this movie. It's a little anthology movie from 1984 called The Dungeon Master. So a lot of little short films. So that's where Ted Nicolau got his start, and David Dakota, and a whole lot of other people that we've covered on this show. So I'm excited to get into that one.
Yeah, I'm excited to talk about that movie too. It's kind of like the We Are the World of Full Moon and Empire cast and crew. So, listeners, thank you so much. Erik, again, thank you for taking the time to join us, and tune in next week with a very special guest also, who you will see when we start to drop some promo posts for that one, to cover The Dungeon Master. So stay tuned.